Imagine a scenario where like a single swarm of cheap modified drones permanently removes up to a third of the world's oil supply.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and not for a week or a month, but for the next 4 years.
Right.
And they don't do it by harassing shipping lanes or, sinking tankers in the middle of the ocean.
It's what everyone always focuses on.
Exactly. They do it by just burning down the highly flammable, unmovable infrastructure sitting right there on the coastline.
That sounds like a sci-fi movie plot, honestly.
It really does, right? But according to one of our analysts for today's deep dive, this isn't speculative fiction at all. It is the exact unspoken hostage situation that the global economy is just currently trapped in.
So we are essentially looking at a geopolitical chessboard where the traditional metrics of power, how many aircraft carriers you have or the size of your nuclear arsenal, all of that might actually be completely irrelevant to the final outcome.
Yeah.
And today, we are mapping out this really intense debate between two Dutch military and geopolitical commentators, Flipse and Kees to Kort.
And what's wild is that both men are looking at the exact same escalating tensions between the U.S., China, and Iran, the exact same data points.
Right. But they arrive at fundamentally opposite conclusions about who is actually holding the winning hand.
And we are going to impartially map out both of their arguments today, completely without taking sides, so you, the listener, can just see the mechanics of this massive global shift.
Because the stakes for figuring out who is right here are just massive. I mean, if those coastal installations go offline, it doesn't just mean a diplomatic crisis in some distant desert.
No, not at all.
It means the global shipping container that's carrying your electronics, your car parts, your generic pharmaceuticals, suddenly that costs like 400% more to move.
Yeah, it dictates the literal cost of heating your home this winter.
Exactly. We're unpacking the end of an era that has basically kept Western economies stable for decades.
So to understand where these two analysts think the global power struggle is heading, we really have to look at the incredibly different lenses they use to view the world.
Right, and those lenses were forged on opposite sides of the exact same fence during the Cold War.
I love this part. Okay, let's unpack this history because it is so crucial.
That historical context is literally the skeleton key to their entire debate.
Yeah.
So in the 1970s and 80s, the Netherlands, like the rest of Western Europe, was just caught in the grip of the Cold War. The world was starkly bipolar.
Us versus them, black and white.
Exactly. So you have Flipse, right?
Mm-hmm.
He began a 30-year career in the conventional military, starting in 1974.
Okay.
And when you spend 3 decades in that institutional structure, your analytical framework is entirely built around grand centralized strategy.
Right, because you're planning for the big one.
Exactly. He trained to defend the Fulda Gap. That's that crucial lowland corridor in Germany where NATO fully expected massive columns of Soviet tanks to pour through if World War III ever kicked off.
So in that world, everything is managed by dominant superpowers enforcing order. It's heavy armor, massive defense budgets, and clear lines drawn on a map.
You know exactly who the enemy is.
Exactly. But then on the flip side, you have Kees to Kort, and his background is just completely wild when you put it next to Ab's.
It really is a massive contrast.
Yeah, so Kees was a conscripted soldier. He served until 1987, but he was heavily involved in the VVDM.
Right.
And for anyone unfamiliar with that, that was the Vereniging van Dienstplichtige Militairen, which is literally a labor union for conscripted soldiers in the Dutch military.
Which is just a structural paradox to a lot of modern military thinkers.
Right.
A military labor union.
Right. It sounds like an oxymoron.
But in the Dutch armed forces of that era, it held immense cultural and practical power.
Yeah.
Because while the high command, guys like were calculating tank deployments against the Soviets, the VDDM was literally organizing strikes inside the barracks.
Just casually going on strike in the military.
Exactly. They were protesting everything from like mandatory hair length to compensation, all the way up to the deployment of nuclear cruise missiles.
Right. That was the massive ban the bomb movement that was just sweeping across Europe at the time.
Exactly. So I was looking at how Kees operated in this environment, and it's fascinating because his approach wasn't really built on this high-minded, abstract ideology.
It was more practical.
Very practical. He approached the military like a pragmatist. To him, soldiers were essentially just employees in uniform.
They were workers who needed better contracts, overtime pay, safe working conditions.
Right. He spent his formative years negotiating with this massive, entrenched bureaucracy. the military high command.
Yeah.
And he didn't do it by threatening to defeat them in battle, obviously. He did it by figuring out exactly where their operational vulnerabilities were and applying pressure.
Which translates perfectly into how he views the Middle East today.
Completely.
Because Kees evaluates geopolitical players the exact same way a union negotiator evaluates a multinational corporation.
Right. He isn't intimidated by the sheer scale of a superpower's military.
No, he looks exclusively for leverage.
Yeah.
He's always asking, where is this massive entity vulnerable? What critical resource can an opposing force withhold to freeze the entire operation and force the superpower to the negotiating table?
So you have this amazing dynamic, AB, who analyzes the world through the mechanics of overwhelming force and established alliances.
Preparing for World War III.
Right, and then Kees, who reads the world through the mechanics of asymmetric leverage and strikes, essentially organizing a labor strike inside the geopolitical barracks.
It's just such a cool setup, and yet, despite these totally incompatible worldviews, they both agree on one glaring historical blind spot from their time in the military.
Oh, absolutely, the bipolar blind spot.
Yeah, back in the 70s and 80s, the entire defense apparatus was just staring through binoculars at Moscow.
Just completely treating countries like China and India as if they were functionally non-existent on the global stage.
Right, because Western defense strategies just completely ignored the East. Those nations were not projecting power across oceans at that time.
They were agrarian, internal, impoverished, you know. But while NATO and the Warsaw Pact were locked in this staring contest,
Yeah.
the actual challengers for 21st century dominance were steadily building the industrial capacity to challenge the entire system.
And the realization of that long-term shift brings both AB and Kees to their single point of total agreement, the absolute death of Pax Americana.
The unipolar era is completely over.
Yeah, Kees specifically pinpoints the year 1989 as the absolute zenith of American power.
Which makes sense. The Berlin Wall falls, the Soviet Union implodes, and China hasn't even really begun to flex its manufacturing muscle yet.
Right. In 1989, the United States was the sole remaining superpower. Whatever Washington wanted to happen on the globe generally happened.
Because they underwrote the security of the entire global system.
Yeah, let's talk about that insurance underwriter analogy because I think it explains so much.
It really does.
Yeah.
For decades, the U.S. military basically acted as the free insurance underwriter for global maritime trade.
Right.
They patrolled the oceans, they absorbed the massive financial burden of security, and they guaranteed open sea lanes so that everyone else, especially Europe, could trade safely and grow their economies.
And the United States accepted this immense cost because they got to write the rules of global finance and trade in return.
Exactly. But that calculation has shifted drastically.
Right, because the U.S. is now realizing that underwriting the globe is actually a pretty bad deal for them now.
It's expensive.
Extremely. So we are seeing this massive structural pivot inward. The whole Make America Great doctrine, regardless of domestic politics, is fundamentally a geopolitical retraction.
It's the U.S. looking at the map and saying, wait, we have massive oceans on both our east and west coasts.
All right.
We have friendly neighbors to the north and south. We are largely energy independent now.
Yeah, so why are we bankrupting ourselves to police trade routes in the Middle East that primarily benefit China and Europe?
Which forces this huge transition from hegemony to multipolarity.
Right.
Instead of one underwriter, you suddenly have multiple regional powers. You have China, Russia, India, a coalescing Middle East.
All of them demanding a seat at the table and trying to rewrite the rules.
And the immediate casualty of this transition is Europe.
Oh, Europe is terrified.
Because Europe entirely outsourced its hard power security to the United States after 1945.
Yeah, they spent their budgets on robust social safety nets rather than aircraft carriers and munitions plants.
Which means Europe is suddenly holding this insurance policy that the underwriter just canceled.
Right.
And they have absolutely no budget to pay their own premiums.
Both AB and Kees are just brutal in their assessment of the European Union here.
Oh, completely.
They describe a continent plagued by bureaucratic leadership that is completely unequipped for a world where American warships aren't automatically showing up to protect their shipping containers.
And that European predicament perfectly sets up the central conflict of our analyst debate today.
Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting. If Pax Americana was a party where the U.S. was the host, the bouncer, and the DJ, they're now deciding to just grab a drink and sit in the VIP section alone. But who takes over the DJ booth?
Exactly. If the United States is deliberately pulling back its defensive umbrella, managing this controlled retreat from being the world's policeman, who are they most concerned about stepping into the vacuum?
Right.
And this is where Flipse's thesis takes center stage. In Ab's analysis, everything the United States is currently doing in the Middle East, every sanction, every carrier strike group deployed, every tense standoff with Iran,
Yeah.
it is not actually about the Middle East at all.
It's about the year 2049.
And it is entirely about containing China.
That 2049 metric is wild to conceptualize. It operates on a timeline the West just isn't used to.
Not at all. We think in 4-year cycles.
Right. So the Chinese Communist Party took power in 1949. Ab notes that their explicit overriding objective is to achieve total global hegemony by their 100th anniversary in 2049.
We are talking about a political system run by what the sources call the Red families.
Right, these deeply entrenched elite families.
Yeah, who don't have to worry about public opinion polls or losing a midterm congressional majority. They are running a century-long marathon.
They are systematically securing mining rights in Africa, building deep-water ports in South America.
And expanding their naval capacity at a rate that mathematically dwarfs Western shipbuilding.
And this is exactly why AB used Iran as the crucial proxy, because a direct kinetic war between the United States and China is effectively unthinkable.
It would trigger a nuclear exchange and immediately collapse the global economy.
Right, so the conflict has to be fought indirectly.
You don't fight the giant directly. You cut off their supply lines.
You choke its food supply. And China's industrial base, its manufacturing centers, its rapidly expanding military fallas, they all have an insatiable appetite for energy.
They require massive, uninterrupted flows of oil from the Middle East.
And Ab's argument is that the United States recognizes this critical vulnerability.
Right. Iran, China, and Russia are operating as this increasingly tight economic and military bloc.
Yeah.
So by exerting overwhelming pressure on Iran, by heavily sanctioning them, threatening their infrastructure, keeping the region destabilized, the U.S. is effectively putting a tourniquet on China's primary energy supply line.
They don't necessarily need to invade Iran or establish a thriving democracy there.
Yeah.
They just need to control the throttle of the resources flowing east.
It's a very traditional force-based view of the world. And Am doesn't shy away from the ideological reality of Iran either.
Right. He emphasizes that the U.S. is facing a 47-year theocratic regime that brutally suppresses its own citizens,
while actively funding proxy militias across the entire region. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen.
And they do this with a deeply ingrained, stated doctrine: death to the West.
Exactly. Ab sees a clear adversary with a destructive goal, acting as the vanguard for a rival superpower.
And importantly, Ab flatly rejects this growing narrative that the American empire is in an irreversible state of terminal collapse.
Right. He believes American structural power is incredibly resilient.
In his view, when push comes to shove, the United States will leverage its massive economic and military weight to force its Western allies to fall in line.
They will exert the necessary pressure, secure pragmatic back-channel deals, and ultimately maintain definitive control over the Middle East. Pragmatism and hard power will win out.
So Ab paints Iran as the symptom and China as the disease. And his theory of proxy warfare makes sense on paper. You cut the supply lines to weaken the adversary.
It does make sense.
Yeah.
But that entire strategy hinges on one massive load-bearing assumption.
Right.
It assumes the U.S. actually possesses the leverage to squeeze Iran without suffering catastrophic collateral damage to its own economy.
And that assumption is exactly where Kees believes America just walked blindfolded into a trap.
Which brings us to Kees de Kort's counter-thesis. Kees completely flips the geopolitical board here.
Yeah.
While Ab sees the U.S. executing this deliberate, masterful, long-term containment strategy, Kees sees a superpower making a fatal miscalculation born out of hubris.
Kees argues that the U.S., heavily influenced by regional allies like Israel, really wanted to flex its muscles in the Middle East to send a clear message to Beijing.
Kind of like how the U.S. used to operate under the Monroe Doctrine in South America.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Essentially saying, this is our hemisphere, we dictate the terms.
Right.
They tried to project that exact same aura of invincibility toward Iran to show China who was still the boss.
But according to Kees, the moment the U.S. escalated their posture, they experienced this profound, immediate panic.
Yeah, he claims that within 48 hours of ramping up the pressure, American Strategic Command realized they had fundamentally misunderstood the true nature of modern Iranian power.
They realized that the battlefield had completely changed.
Because Kees isn't counting stealth bombers or aircraft carriers. Like we said earlier, he's a union guy at heart. He's counting leverage points.
Right.
He points out that Iran has absolutely no illusion of conquering the globe. Their strategic goal is much more focused. They simply want the United States completely and permanently removed from the Middle East.
And to understand how Iran plans to achieve that, we have to look at a concept in NAVO. Kees calls the pain threshold asymmetry.
This is arguably the most vital mechanic in his entire analysis.
It really is.
I was looking at this pain threshold concept, and it struck me that he's basically saying the U.S. system is a victim of its own success.
Oh, completely.
Because the American political and economic machine is a high-performance engine that requires perfectly refined fuel to run. We need constant, uninterrupted economic growth.
The pain threshold in the American public is just incredibly low.
So low. I mean, if the price of gasoline spikes by $2 a gallon, supply chain stall, inflation ticks up a few percentage points.
And the sitting administration gets completely wiped out in the next election.
Exactly. The entire system is hypersensitive to economic disruption.
Now, contrast that hypersensitivity with Iran. You have a regime that has spent over 4 decades surviving under the most crushing, comprehensive economic sanctions the West could engineer.
Decades of it.
They have endured total financial isolation, covert military sabotage, massive internal unrest.
Yeah.
And yet the state apparatus remains fully intact. They have built an entire shadow economy specifically designed to function under maximum pressure.
They are calloused. You cannot threaten a population with economic hardship when they have already adapted to survive it.
We are just too comfortable to win a war of attrition.
Right. But the asymmetry gets so much worse when you look at the physical geography.
This is the part that is just chilling.
Yeah, because when most people think about a conflict with Iran, they immediately picture the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. We all know the terrifying statistics. A massive percentage of the world's daily oil supply floats through this tiny, narrow bottleneck.
And the traditional fear has always been that Iran would lay naval mines in the water or use fast attack boats to harass the tankers.
But Kees points out that attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz is actually a secondary, almost obsolete threat.
Yeah, the real leverage doesn't float. The real trump card is the static, indefensible infrastructure sitting on the land right across the Persian Gulf.
This is the part that genuinely stopped me in my tracks when I read his analysis. He's talking about the extraction installations, the refineries.
And specifically the massive desalination plants in Abu Dhabi, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates.
We really need to dive into the mechanics of why this infrastructure is so vital and so vulnerable.
Yeah, let's break that down.
So these desert nations survive entirely on modern engineering marvels. They build these multi-billion-dollar desalination complexes to remove salt from seawater just so their populations have drinking water.
Right. This is barely any natural fresh water.
Exactly. And these plants require massive, massive amounts of energy to run, which means they're almost always co-located with colossal oil and gas processing facilities.
They are highly complex, pressurized, and incredibly flammable.
And they do not move.
They are completely static targets. So if you are Iran and the United States pushes you to the brink of existential collapse,
You don't waste your resources trying to fight a symmetric naval battle against U.S. carrier strike groups in the open ocean.
no, you launch swarms of cheap, modified drones and precision missiles directly at those desalination and oil plants across the Gulf.
And the defense economics here are just completely broken.
Right.
Because a modern U.S. Patriot missile battery is an incredible piece of technology. But firing a $2 million interceptor missile to shoot down a $20,000 drone?
It's a losing mathematical equation.
Completely. A swarm of 50 drones will simply exhaust the battery's magazine, and the remaining drones will impact the target.
And if those plants burn, the consequences aren't just a temporary dip in the stock market.
Not at all.
Right, because rebuilding a desalination plant isn't like patching a pothole. These facilities require highly specialized, custom-machined components that have multi-year supply chain backlogs.
Yeah.
If they are destroyed, Kees argues you are permanently removing a massive percentage of the world's oil and liquid natural gas supply from the global market for 2 to 4 years.
Over years.
4 years. And if Qatar or the UAE loses their desalination capacity, they don't just lose money.
They lose the ability to hydrate their populations within 48 hours.
It is an immediate existential collapse.
Kees argues that this is the ultimate form of asymmetric leverage. It's a global hostage situation.
So it's like a hostage negotiation, but Iran isn't threatening the U.S. directly. They're threatening to burn down the bank that the whole world uses.
Exactly. They don't need to defeat the U.S. military. They just need to credibly threaten to burn down the infrastructure of America's regional allies.
Because the moment that threat becomes imminent, those Arab states, knowing their entire existence relies on that delicate infrastructure, will panic.
They will turn to Washington and demand that the United States immediately de-escalate.
They will demand the U.S. withdraw its forces from the region entirely, just to prevent Iran from pulling the trigger on their economies.
Kees suggests that Iran essentially has its hand resting directly on the master valve of the global economy.
Yeah.
And the West has absolutely no countermeasure that doesn't trigger the exact catastrophe they're trying to prevent.
And if you think this sounds like a theoretical war game, both analysts point out that we are basically watching a live fire proof of concept happening right now.
Yes, that mathematical asymmetry brings us directly to how Kees views the current crisis with the Houthis in Yemen.
Right. If you want proof that targeting choke points works, look at the Red Sea.
The Houthis, who are an armed group heavily aligned with Iran, have successfully disrupted one of the most vital maritime arteries on the planet.
Yeah.
And the defining characteristic of this conflict is the total failure of conventional deterrence.
Because over a year and a half ago, the United States and its allies began bombing Houthi launch sites. The most advanced fighting force in human history unleashed precision airstrikes to secure the shipping lanes.
And it essentially achieved nothing.
Nothing.
The Houthis absorbed the strikes, they adapted, and they proved they could shut down the Red Sea basically at will.
It's the pain threshold in action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could drop multi-million-dollar ordnance on a group that has survived a brutal decade-long civil war, but you don't change their strategic calculus.
You might blow up a radar dish, but you don't break their will.
Meanwhile, the economic bleed on the West is staggering.
Oh, it's massive. Every single day that a major shipping conglomerate has to reroute a massive container ship around the Cape of Good Hope instead of using the Suez Canal,
Right.
it adds weeks to the journey and millions of dollars in fuel costs.
And those costs are immediately passed on to the consumer. It drives up the baseline inflation of every physical good in Europe and the United States.
Which brings us back to the stark reality for Europe. Because throughout this intense, high-level debate between Ab and Kees, the one thing they do not argue about is how utterly irrelevant Europe has become in this new paradigm.
They are completely sidelined.
Yeah.
There is this remarkably blunt quote from the source material regarding the Netherlands' own capability. The analysts note that the Dutch military essentially consists of a few minesweepers.
A few minesweepers.
Right. In a multipolar world where the panels of global power are shifting violently, if you do not possess independent hard power and you do not control vital supply chain bottlenecks,
Your diplomatic opinion is entirely irrelevant.
you are just a passenger in a car someone else is driving.
If those desalination plants across the Strait of Hormuz go offline, or if the Red Sea remains indefinitely closed, the European standard of living is going to take a direct, unprecedented hit.
The era of cheap energy and unquestioned maritime security that allowed Western economies to flourish in the late 20th century is rapidly closing.
So we have unpacked two deeply compelling, completely contradictory visions for how this global transition will resolve.
Right. You have Ab Flipse, who envisions a world where pragmatism and enduring American hard power ultimately stabilize the board.
Yeah.
He foresees the West exerting overwhelming, coordinated pressure to push back against China's 2049 ambitions, maintaining their grip on global resources through sheer force of will and military superiority.
But then Kees looks at the exact same data points and sees an American empire that has vastly overextended itself.
He envisions an economically victorious Iran, leveraging its incredibly high pain threshold and its geographic proximity to fragile infrastructure.
To force a humiliated, domestically fractured America into a retreat.
What this deep dive truly illustrates is the complexity of modern statecraft. I mean, when two highly experienced experts can analyze the exact same geopolitical chessboard and predict completely different checkmates, it forces us to deeply question our baseline assumptions.
The traditional metrics of power tanks, planes, GDP, they might just no longer be the deciding factors.
The map isn't static anymore.
No, you can't just look at the borders in the capital cities. You have to see the invisible lines of leverage, the fragile supply chains, the choke points.
Which leaves us with a critical, defining question for the future. As this new multipolar reality violently shakes out, the deciding factor may not be a weapon you can point to on a map.
It all comes back to the pain threshold. We have built highly comfortable modern Western societies based on convenience, instant gratification, and continuous frictionless economic growth. So what happens when a society like that is forced into a prolonged, grinding war of attrition against nations that have spent decades mastering the art of surviving under extreme hardship?
When the asymmetric leverage is finally pulled and the economic pain truly hits home.
Who breaks first?